The Enchanted Ashes. Long ago, in a land where wonders and wishes intertwined, a story of resilience, kindness, and a touch of enchantment began to unfold. Welcome to Eldoria, a realm where tales of magic are whispered through the winds. Today, we step into the extraordinary journey of a young girl whose courage and grace triumphed over hardship. In a grand estate nestled between emerald hills, a nobleman remarried after years of solitude. His new wife, an elegant but cold-hearted woman, brought with her 2 daughters, who mirrored her arrogance and vanity in every way. The nobleman, however, had a daughter from his first marriage, a girl whose heart was as pure as morning dew. She had inherited her mother's gentle nature, radiating kindness wherever she went. The moment the wedding feast ended, the lady of the house revealed her true nature. She despised her stepdaughter's goodness, for it cast an unflattering light upon her own children. Determined to keep the girl in the shadows, she stripped her of her fine garments and reduced her to a servant in her own home. From dawn until dusk, the young girl toiled. She scrubbed floors, polished silver, and prepared lavish meals she was never allowed to taste. At night, while her stepsisters rested in grand chambers adorned with velvet drapes and crystal chandeliers, she curled up in the attic upon a straw mattress, with only the cold wind for company. She found solace beside the hearth, where the warmth of the embers reminded her of the love she had once known. Her stepsisters, with mockery in their voices, began calling her Ashen-Ella, for she was always covered in soot. Despite the cruelty she endured, Ashen-Ella's beauty shone through her tattered garments. Her spirit remained unbroken, her kindness untouched by bitterness. One day, the kingdom buzzed with excitement. A grand ball was to be held at the royal palace. The prince himself had extended invitations to every noble family. The stepmother's daughters were elated, envisioning themselves dazzling in the prince's eyes. They spent days selecting the finest silks and adorning themselves with jewels that sparkled like stardust. For Ashen-Ella, this event only meant more work. She spent hours stitching delicate embroidery onto her sisters' gowns, pressing their elaborate skirts, and arranging their hair into perfect curls. As she helped them prepare, she dared to dream, if only for a moment, that she too might one day dance under the golden chandeliers of the palace. But her stepmother had other plans, and the door to the outside world remained firmly shut. Little did they know, magic had a way of finding those with the purest of hearts. The preparations for the grand ball were in full swing. The stepsisters summoned the finest seamstresses and hairdressers in the land to ensure their appearance was flawless. Their gowns were stitched with golden threads, their bodices adorned with pearls, and their elaborate headpieces crafted by the most skilled hands. Even their delicate rouges and powders arrived from the famed Madame Bellefort's boutique. Despite their cruelty, they insisted on Cinderella's help. Her talent for styling and her keen sense of fashion made her the perfect advisor. Without hesitation, she adjusted their hair, arranged their silks, and even ensured their laces were tied just right. As she worked, one of them smirked. "Tell us, Ashen-Ella, wouldn't you love to attend the ball?" Her heart clenched, but she forced a soft smile. "Oh, you mock me. A girl like me would never be welcome there." "You are quite right," the other sister sneered. "Imagine the laughter if a girl covered in soot dared to stand among the nobles." Cinderella remained silent, her hands steady, as she finished their elegant braids. It would have been easy to tangle their hair or lace their dresses too tightly, but her heart was too kind for such petty revenge. Finally, the evening arrived. Dripping in jewels, the stepsisters stepped into their grand carriage and disappeared into the glowing horizon. Cinderella watched from the doorway until they were no more than distant figures in the twilight. Then, unable to hold back her sorrow, she sank into a chair and wept. From the dim candlelight, a soft, knowing voice spoke. "My child, why do you cry?" She looked up to find her godmother standing there, a warm presence in the cold room. "I only wish," Cinderella began, but her voice faltered under the weight of her longing. "You wish to go to the ball," her godmother finished gently. "And so you shall." Cinderella's eyes widened in disbelief. "But how?" Her godmother merely smiled. "Bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella hurried to the garden, plucking the roundest one she could find. She carried it inside, confused as to how this simple vegetable could possibly change her fate. But with a single wave of her godmother's hand, the pumpkin shimmered, stretching and expanding into a magnificent golden carriage. Still breathless with amazement, she followed her godmother's next instruction. The mousetrap in the corner revealed 6 tiny creatures, their noses twitching curiously. One by one, as they scurried out, her godmother tapped them lightly with her wand. Each mouse transformed into a grand, dappled gray steed, strong and proud, ready to lead the enchanted carriage. "But who will drive it?" Cinderella asked, the magic unfolding before her eyes. Her godmother smiled knowingly. "Go check the rat trap." Cinderella returned moments later, carrying 3 plump rats, their whiskers twitching. The fairy observed them carefully, then chose the largest one. With a flick of her wand, the rat stood taller, his fur vanishing into fine livery. A magnificent coachman now stood before them, his proud mustache curling at the edges, his uniform gleaming. "And now," the fairy said, "for the final touch." She motioned toward the garden. "Behind the watering pot, you'll find 6 lizards. Bring them to me." Cinderella obeyed, not knowing what wonders would come next. No sooner had Cinderella placed the lizards in her godmother's hands than they transformed into 6 fine footmen. Dressed in elegant liveries embroidered with gold and silver, they leaped to their positions behind the carriage, standing as still and formal as if they had served royalty their entire lives. The fairy smiled warmly. "Now, my dear, your carriage awaits. Is this not the grandest sight?" "Oh, yes," Cinderella gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. But as she glanced down at her soot-covered dress, her excitement wavered. "But must I go dressed like this?" Her godmother chuckled softly, and with a gentle tap of her wand, Cinderella's rags shimmered, dissolving into a gown of breathtaking beauty. It was woven with gold and silver threads, glittering like 1,000 stars, and adorned with gemstones that caught the light with every movement. Upon her feet, delicate slippers of pure crystal appeared, as if crafted from moonlight itself. Cinderella twirled, barely believing the reflection she saw in the window pane. "This magic will last only until the stroke of midnight," her godmother warned. "Once the clock strikes 12, everything will return to the way it was. Your gown, the carriage, and even your attendants. You must leave the ball before that moment." "I promise," Cinderella vowed, barely able to contain her joy. With that, she climbed into the carriage, her heart racing with excitement as it sped toward the palace gates. The grand hall was illuminated by golden chandeliers, casting a glow upon the shimmering marble floors. The moment Cinderella stepped inside, a hush fell over the room. The music ceased, and all eyes turned to the radiant figure who had just arrived. "Who is she?" came the hushed whispers. "Such beauty, such grace." Even the king, though aged and wise, leaned toward the queen and murmured, "It has been years since I have seen such elegance." The prince himself, entranced by the vision before him, wasted no time. He strode forward, offering his hand to Cinderella as she stepped from the entrance. Their fingers barely touched, yet a spark seemed to dance between them. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. Cinderella hesitated only a moment before nodding. As they took to the floor, the music resumed, filling the hall with a melody so enchanting that it felt as if the world itself had melted away. Every movement she made was light as air, her steps effortlessly graceful. The prince never looked away, mesmerized by the mystery of the woman before him. A lavish banquet was served, but the prince barely touched his plate. His eyes never left Cinderella, as if afraid she might vanish at any moment. Seated near her sisters, Cinderella remained composed, treating them with surprising kindness. She offered them slices of the finest citrus fruits gifted by the prince himself, much to their astonishment. How could this noble lady, so elegant, so admired, show such warmth to them? Time passed in a blur of joy, but then, a chime. The great clock at the center of the hall struck once, then again. 11 times it rang before the silence of anticipation fell once more. Cinderella's heart pounded. Only 15 minutes remained. She stood swiftly, offering a graceful curtsy before excusing herself. The prince reached for her hand, but she had already turned away, slipping through the gathering crowd. By the time she reached the palace steps, she could hear the 12th chime approaching. Her carriage awaited, and as soon as she stepped inside, it rolled away into the night. The moment she returned home, Cinderella found her godmother waiting. "You enjoyed yourself, did you not?" "Oh, it was more wonderful than I ever dreamed," she sighed. "The prince himself asked for me to return tomorrow." Just then, loud knocks rapped against the door. Her stepsisters had returned. Thinking quickly, Cinderella yawned, stretching her arms as if just waking. "How long you were gone," she exclaimed sleepily. "You wouldn't say that if you had been there," one sister scoffed. The ball was magnificent, and the most breathtaking princess was there, though no one knows who she is. Cinderella merely smiled, a secret blooming in her heart. "The most dazzling princess arrived at the ball last night," one of the sisters gushed, twirling a lock of hair between her fingers. No one had ever seen such beauty before. She was kindness itself, offering us rare fruits from the prince's own table. Cinderella tilted her head in mock curiosity. "She must have been truly magnificent. How fortunate you were to meet her. What was her name?" The sisters exchanged glances and shrugged. "No one knows. The prince was utterly enchanted by her and would trade the world to learn her identity." A sly smile played at the corners of Cinderella's lips. "How I wish I could see her. Perhaps if you lent me your yellow gown, dear Charlotte, I could catch a glimpse." Charlotte let out a sharp laugh. "Lend my gown to you? A filthy cinder girl? I'd be a fool." Cinderella expected this response and was secretly relieved. She had no need for borrowed rags when magic awaited her. The following evening, her stepsisters departed once more, draped in their finest silks. But soon after, Cinderella's godmother waved her wand, and a gown even more magnificent than before appeared. Its embroidery shimmered like fireflies beneath the moonlight, and the glass slippers upon her feet sparkled with an unearthly glow. At the palace, all eyes turned to Cinderella the moment she stepped through the grand doors. The prince, who had spent the entire day searching for his mysterious guest, rushed to her side at once. "You have returned," he said breathlessly. She smiled. "Was I gone so long?" The night passed in a blur of music and stolen glances. Cinderella, lost in the magic of it all, paid little attention to time. Only when the great clock began to chime did she realize her mistake. Midnight. Her heart pounded. She had lingered too long. With a gasp, she turned and ran, her golden skirts trailing behind her like a whisper of light. The prince called after her, but she was already slipping down the grand staircase, her glass slippers clicking against the marble steps. As she fled, one delicate slipper loosened and fell from her foot, but she dared not stop. She dashed past the palace gates, the spell unraveling around her. By the time she reached her home, the magnificent gown had vanished, leaving her in her worn and tattered dress. The only remnant of her enchanted night was the single glass slipper clutched in her hands. Meanwhile, the palace guards, when questioned, swore they had seen no grand lady leave, only a simple girl, dressed in rags, disappearing into the shadows. The next morning, Cinderella greeted her sisters as they stumbled inside, their excitement still fresh. "Oh, it was marvelous!" one of them cried. "The princess was there again, but she ran away just as the clock struck 12. And she left behind the most exquisite slipper," the other added. "The prince picked it up himself and has not stopped talking about her since." Cinderella lowered her gaze to hide her amusement. True to their words, the news spread like wildfire across the kingdom. Within days, a royal decree echoed through the streets. Whoever could fit the glass slipper would become the prince's bride. From noblewomen to ladies of the court, the slipper was tried on dainty feet, yet none could make it fit. Finally, the search reached Cinderella's own home. Her stepsisters, desperate to claim the title of princess, took turns forcing their feet into the delicate shoe. They tugged and squeezed, but no matter how they twisted, the slipper would not yield. Cinderella, standing quietly nearby, watched with knowing eyes. Then, with a soft laugh, she spoke. "Perhaps I should try as well." Her sisters erupted into cruel laughter. "You? Don't be ridiculous." But their laughter would soon fade to silence. The royal envoy, tasked with finding the mysterious maiden, carefully examined Cinderella as she stood quietly in the corner. Despite her simple attire, there was an undeniable grace about her. With a knowing look, he spoke firmly. "It is only fair that every young woman in the household has a chance to try." He gestured for Cinderella to sit, and as she delicately placed her foot inside the glass slipper, it slid on effortlessly, as if it had been crafted just for her. Gasps filled the room. Her stepsisters stared in disbelief, their faces drained of color. But before they could utter a word, Cinderella reached into her pocket and revealed the missing slipper. She gently slipped it onto her other foot, the two glistening like stars against the dullness of her old garments. Just then, a shimmering light filled the room. From the shadows, her godmother emerged, her wand glowing with warmth. With a single touch, Cinderella's tattered dress transformed once more, this time into a gown even more splendid than before. Jewels adorned its flowing fabric, and golden embroidery traced delicate patterns across the fabric. Her stepsisters collapsed to their knees, realization washing over them. You were the princess at the ball," one whispered. Cinderella gazed at them, her expression filled not with bitterness, but with kindness. As they tearfully begged for forgiveness, she bent down, taking their hands in hers. "I hold no anger in my heart," she said softly. "Let us leave the past behind and move forward together." Word of Cinderella's discovery reached the palace at once. She was escorted to the prince, and the moment he laid eyes on her, his heart was certain. This was the woman he had searched for. "You are even more radiant than I remembered," he murmured, taking her hands in his. Days later, a grand wedding was held, and Cinderella became the kingdom's beloved princess. Yet, her kindness did not end there. Instead of casting her stepsisters away, she ensured they found comfort within the palace walls. In time, they too found happiness, each marrying noblemen of the court. And so, the girl who once sat in the ashes became a queen, not only in title, but in heart. As the final bell tolled that night, their story found its happily ever after. But remember, true kindness and a heart full of courage will always lead the way to happiness. Thank you for joining us on this magical journey. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more timeless fairy tales. Until next time, may your dreams be as bright as the stars above. See you in the next story.